The National Taxpayers Union says that President Biden's $7.3 trillion budget calls for the largest tax increase in American history, as well as trillions of dollars in spending and $100 billion in additional funding for the IRS. Joining me now is Brandon Arnold, Executive Vice President of the National Taxpayers Union, to discuss the budget's implications for taxpayers, small businesses, and the national debt. Brandon Arnold, thank you very much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Now, Biden just released his budget this week, and it's a $7.3 trillion budget. Talk to me about what's in there and what's concerning about it.
It's an enormous budget, and it would call for the largest tax increase in American history, nearly $5 trillion in new taxes, which I think is a bad idea anytime, but particularly when you have an economy that is very much in a difficult situation with continued high inflation, with a lot of people, particularly working class Americans, that are really struggling to get by. I think a massive tax increase would be a really bad formula for the country right now. And then, of course, you have trillions of dollars of spending on top of that. So it's more taxes, more spending, again, taking the country in a really perilous direction at a time when I think we need to chart a different course.
It calls for taxing the wealthy, so 25% minimum tax on households earning more than $100 million. The top individual tax rate was raised from 37 to 39.6%. How will this impact the national debt?
When you start talking about these types of taxes, when you start talking about taxing people that are wealthier, it may sound good politically speaking, but what happens is you end up hurting the economy at large here, because those taxes aren't just paid by wealthy individuals, they're also paid by businesses that file their taxes on the individual side of the tax code. So those are small businesses in many instances. Again, when you start raising taxes on the business community, they respond in one of two ways usually, and that is either reducing the size of their workforce to reduce their costs. That's bad because oftentimes it's working class Americans that get laid off. Or the other thing they do is often increase the prices of their goods or services. And at a time when we've been just absolutely walloped with high inflation, if they start increasing those services and goods costs, then guess what? That's going to push more inflation rather than bringing it down, which is the direction we need to go.
So let's talk about the priorities of the budget. It would implement tax cuts or cuts on spending for the Department of Veterans Affairs and pushing more spending for Gaza, the wars in Ukraine, and increasing IRS funding. Talk to me a bit about what the impact of this will be.
And the IRS funding is something we're very, very concerned about. It's over $100 billion extra funding for the IRS. We just saw a huge supersizing of the IRS budget in the Inflation Reduction Act 2 years ago. That was an $80 billion increase that has since been chipped away against a little bit by the Republicans in Congress. But we're still talking about an enormous IRS with great, not just more money, but also more authority. What this Biden budget also does is chip away at what's called a supervisory approval process. That is to say, if the IRS is assessing a tax penalty against you, before the IRS can do so, a supervisor needs to sign off to make sure that that penalty is legit. This would remove that oversight, remove that taxpayer protection, so that you could have a lot more penalty assessments going out to taxpayers. That brings in more revenue, but it also opens up the floodgates to more malfeasance at the IRS.
How's our national debt going to be impacted by this budget?
Well, it's not a pretty picture when you talk about the national debt. We're $34 trillion in debt right now. We have annual deficits. Last year was $1.7 trillion. We're on track to eclipse that. We're already 40% above that just 5 months into the fiscal year. So we're on a really, really dangerous path already. And we haven't seen much willingness from the Congress, Republicans and Democrats, to be fair, to cut spending. This budget puts us on that current trajectory that we're on and kind of turbocharges it, because even though we have more tax revenue coming in under this budget, we also see a great deal more spending. So they've tried to put some rosy projections on where our economy is going to go. They think inflation is going to go down. They think the economy is going to produce a lot of jobs and a lot of growth. I'm a little skeptical, especially if you're talking about raising taxes to the tune of nearly $5 trillion.
Brandon Arnold, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.